Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, January 23rd, and welcome to Pitcher Week. This is the first of 4 pitcher-centric episodes that we're going to have in the feed this week. We're going to break down all things starting pitchers over the next 3 episodes, and then at the end of the week, we will have a relief pitcher breakdown for the upcoming season. It's the best week of the year, and it's kicking off our position preview series for 2023.
That's right. In some sort of multiverse, mind-bending way, we've recorded a lot of that content that has yet to come, but we will kick it off with the best pitchers, and that's tied to my pitcher rankings that came out last week. But there is news in this space. In the effort to improve the model, we have taken Stuff Plus and we've done a couple things to it. We've trained it on 2022 data, which is always better when it's trained against more data. We have separated it into 3 models: one fastball model, one breaking ball model, and one off-speed model, and that has improved our standard error when we look at how well they can project the future. And so we have those numbers behind the scenes. We'll hear those. We're working towards projections with Jordan Rosenblum, so that's going on. That's still to come. But we're also drafting, so we're bringing in ADP, and we're bringing in sort of more standard numbers that you guys recognize, and we're trying to today look at the top 20 or so.
Yeah, we figured top 20, top 25, probably going to get through that pick 100 mark. So just for anyone who's new to our show, what we do for our position preview series, we take a look at NFBC ADP because NFBC leagues are paid drafts that have been happening all winter. It's a sharp group of players that actually have put something into their drafts.
Good sample to, decently, like there's always drafts going on, so it's a good sample.
Yeah, we're looking at January specifically, so we're kind of lopping off the very, very early drafts that happened in October, November, and December. Eventually, the ESPN ADP, the Yahoo ADP, other sites' ADP will look different, in part also because the players are different, the league parameters are different, and the draft room has different sorting orders, right? So one thing that people probably don't think a lot about is whatever order that a site provider uses to put players in does influence when players are taken. Whether you like it or not, it's going to lead some people in the room or many people in the room to go one direction versus another. So anyway, we use the NFBC ADP around here for those reasons.
And even if it's not just a straight bias for where these players are appearing at the top of the queue, and so therefore, I will be biased to pick one of these players. I'd rather not just scroll down a bunch for the player. Even if you do the scrolling down and you scroll down and you pick up the players, you should consider ADP, because even if your rankings say you should take this guy at 100 and everybody else is taking him at 150, you're going to get more value out of your own rankings if you take that guy at 125. And don't spend all the way up to where exactly you have him. And so ADP is always going to be, a valuable piece of information for how you decide when you want to take a player.
Yeah, I think that's a really important consideration for it. So don't necessarily use it as your one and only guide for what to do on draft day, but be very aware of it and understand how you can take advantage of what the room is likely to do versus what you actually want to do with your roster builds.
We were talking off air a little bit about this, and I think last year I made some mistakes in my rankings just because the way that I did it was sort by projections and then use my model to kind of push guys up and push guys down, and that was pretty much it. I mean, there was some injury percentage stuff that I did. I took a look at ADP, but I didn't put ADP in as one of the pieces of information in my rankings when I was building. And what happened was, I put somebody like a Devin Smeltzer ahead of Cal Quantrill. I had my reasons. The model hated Cal Quantrill. I thought Smeltzer might be a 6th starter and Quantrill be a 5th starter. And so, there's a fine line there when you're kind of trying to judge those guys. I think it was a mistake. It was a mistake. I can admit it. And it's a mistake that ADP would have helped me realize, because now that I put ADP in, I can easily see which guys I have to defend. you know. And if I'd seen that Smeltzer had like 150 points of ADP lower than Cal Quantrill, I'd be like, well, I really have to defend that guy. Do I really love that guy? And then I would have been like, well, he's a 6 or 7 starter and this, and maybe the model's not capturing something. It doesn't go hard. You know what I mean? So I would have argued him down. So this year, hopefully, I avoid some pratfalls like that by just taking into consider ADP and being like, if I like a guy and the ADP is really different than the guys around him, then I should be prepared to defend him.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Let's dive in. Let's start at the top of the board. It's a little different if you look at just all players in terms of their ADP. Normally in the NFBC, you're going to see 2 to 3 starting pitchers with clear first-round ADPs. So far this draft season, the elite of the elite pitchers are going just outside the first round in terms of ADP. Sometimes they do creep in there.
I think most drafts, they go at the turn.
They go right at that turn, right? You're at the end. You're like, well, I'm going to get one. I'm going to take a hitter and a pitcher, and I'm going to get one of Corbin Burns and Gerrit Cole, and then the hitter I like, and then I'm going to just build whatever I can get based on who falls to me at the next couple of turns. Burns and Cole have been up in this range for a couple of seasons. Sandy Alcantara new to this range, and then Jacob deGrom is the 4th pitcher sort of in this group consistently in the first 2 rounds. And more recently, deGrom has been making a move to where he is starting to go closer to the end of round 1, beginning of round 2. So I think it's a broader question of what do you prefer to do this year, given the overall shape of the draft board? Do you feel like it's necessary to get one of these guys if you have a later first round draft order position, or do you feel like the position is deep enough and the way people are handling it is leaving you plenty of potential aces in the round 3, round 4 buckets?
I love the Cole or Burns pick. I can get behind that. My personal rankings have Strider right there with deGrom, and Sandy actually a little bit lower than consensus. Those 3, I think, have a fair amount of risk associated with them that I don't see necessarily associated with Cole and Burns in terms of Jake deGrom's health. Sandy Alcantara, it's not so much a risk of how well he'll do. I think it's just a risk that he has a low strikeout rate. The shift rules are changing. And any small injury could, I think, do more damage to him than to somebody else. For example, last year, despite how many innings he pitched, most in baseball, there were 7 guys who struck out more guys than him just by raw strikeouts. And so what if you give Sandy Alcantara 170 innings last year like Kevin Gausman had, right? Kevin Gausman had 205 strikeouts in 175 innings. If Sandy Alcantara has 175 innings, he might have 160 strikeouts. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then where does he rank with 160 strikeouts? Because the best sort of run suppression 160 strikeout guy that I've got is maybe Zack Wheeler. And so I have Sandy ahead of Zack Wheeler because, he probably should pitch more innings than Zack Wheeler. But that should drag Sandy down out of an easy, like if you're going to have a top 3, I don't have a third guy. I think there's a top 2, and then the next 3, I'd rather sort of wait, third.
Okay.
I start thinking third round. What can I get in the third round? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And as far as Burns and Cole go, like I don't see any warts either. If you're getting my choice of the 2, I'm taking Burns ahead of Cole. The park is still easier for Burns to deal with. I think that's kind of borne out a little bit just in what you've seen over the last 2 seasons combined. Corbin Burns, a 0.73 homers per 9. Gerrit Cole, 1.34 homers per 9. So I think
that's a big deal, I think. And that's not going away for Cole either. It seems like it's been here ever since enforcement. I don't think it's going away. But there's another added wrinkle that's kind of interesting. Jeff Zimmerman's injury percentiles has Corbin Burns in the 5th percentile for injuries and Gerrit Cole in the 70th. Now, 70th for a veteran is not necessarily a red flag, more like a yellowish, flag, but 5 percentile is super, super dark green. So that was enough for me to kind of nudge him ahead of Cole.
All right. So I'm with you on Sandy, by the way. Good pitcher. has thrown more innings than anybody in baseball over the last 2 seasons combined. But with that low K rate, there's just a little bit too much risk if he does get hurt. Team context still not great. Park context, fine. But I think he's more of a back of the top 10 sort of guy. And with that sort of ranking, I might not have him anywhere this year, and I may have to just deal with that. deGrom, I think, is the most complicated player in the entire player pool, because if you run the auction calculator, you run projections, and you take what they spit out for innings for what they are and say, okay, I'm going to believe in 168 innings for Jacob deGrom. He's going to pop as the number one pitcher based on what most calculators are going to do. It just comes back to with multiple.
Do you believe that much?
Multiple IL stints, arm
Yeah.
stuff. Like, are you sure? Like, I'm torn on this one. I think that
You want an injury percentile on him, it's 93rd, which I'm even surprised is not higher.
Yeah, but the reason you would consider taking him is that even with a lower projection, 168 innings is lower than the projection you'll find on Burns, on Cole, on Sandy. 230 strikeouts from deGrom. It's 30 more than Sandy Alcantara is projected for by the bat. And that's with Sandy getting projected for 43 more innings. That's a big, big difference, right? And you're getting the best ratios of any starting pitcher by far. So it just comes down to how many lost innings are enough to sink you at a potential second round valuation. Even if it's not early second round, if you're in a room where he slides to the back of round 2, you might think about it. We talked about this a little bit on a recent episode. It comes down to your risk tolerance, right? If you're trying to play in an NFBC overall contest, you're playing in something with a big, big field where you need a lot of things to go right to make a run at the top overall prize. Those scenarios are probably the ones where you can be rewarded the most for deGrom. But at the same time, you can punish your own floor quite a bit if the injury stuff goes sideways. I'm a little more in than out if it's late second round. For now, I'm still hesitating to go in and get deGrom at the 1-2 turn, around that pick 15, pick 16 range where some people are going to push him. I'm still holding back on that. Same as last year. I just want to see him at spring training. I want to see that he's totally healthy, that he has the same velo. I know he got the big contract from the Rangers. I don't think that actually lowers the risk that much. I think that's just what the market commanded that a pitcher this good would get, because even if he misses a year of that contract because of Tommy John or some other big injury, he can return the value of the entire deal in 4 seasons. He's capable of doing that. He's just the ultimate high risk, high reward sort of player. And I find it really hard for me to play that way in my highest stakes leagues.
Yeah. Yeah, I want sure things. The one thing that is difficult is that we've talked a little bit in the other to come podcasts about how the rounds work, and I don't like living in picks 25 through 30, basically the back end of the first round, the back end of the second round. So it means you took a first round pick in the first 5. And then the back end of the second round, you'll be lucky to be looking at Paul Goldschmidt and Francisco Lindor, as well as basically deGrom, Strider, and Woodruff, right, by ADP. And to me, as much as I will make the case for Woodruff in a second, as much as I love Woodruff, and Nola's there too. So there's those 4 guys. I'm not leaping out of my pants to take Sandy Alcantara there, who's in that group, I guess, at 28, ahead of those guys. I'd rather take Goldschmidt, I think. I think that would make sense. Or Lindor. Both guys who are going to hit for power, hit for average, hit for speed on good teams and play a position. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I would take those guys because I know it's got to be a lock that one of those guys is coming back to me. And if it's Woodruff or Nola, I'm cool with that. I don't think I need to jump. If even if I have Strider as a 3rd ranked pitcher, I'm willing to let that ride, because I don't believe there's really a top 3. I believe there's a top 2. And if I come back and I get Strider in the 3rd, happy with that too. So it is something that you can do, and I think you can honestly expand that use case to anywhere in the 3rd round. You know what I mean? I think you can not take a starting pitcher in the 2nd if the Burns or Cole are not there for you. I think you can not take a starting pitcher in the 2nd because a good one will get back to you in the 3rd.
Yeah, I mean, look at the difference here. We're going to call it ADP tier 1.5 because there's not much that separates these guys. Spencer Strider goes here. If you told me Spencer Strider or Brandon Woodruff is going to move up and Sandy, because of the aforementioned low K rate, is going to come down a little bit, that wouldn't surprise me at all if that happens between now and the end part
I think
of draft
deGrom
season.
will go up, dude. I think people...
Healthy deGrom always goes up the board every time.
I think just every spring, deGrom, he just goes up every spring because our hope, bubbles. Our hope springs eternal,
But this group, Strider, Woodruff, Aaron Nola, Shane McClanahan, Dylan Cease, Justin Verlander, Carlos Rodón, Max Scherzer, Zack Wheeler, and Julio Urías going a little later. This is basically the round 3, round 4 combo. So it stretches out over a pretty big range. If I were going to push one of these guys up, I would push up Brandon Woodruff over Strider. I think it's because the arsenal is a little bit deeper. We've seen it over a longer period of time. I understand why people like Strider. It sounds like if you had the choice, though, with Strider being 3rd in your rankings, Strider is your guy that you would nudge up. Or if we were in an auction scenario where it's just dollar for dollar, go get your guys, you're more likely to put the extra dollar on Strider than you are on the rest of this group.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to reference this a couple times, but it helps my understanding of the relationship between quantity of innings and quality of innings. Here's a real interesting sort that you can do that I think kind of brings it into focus. You can go over to Fangraphs and just sort by raw strikeouts. It's boring. I know. It seems like, the ones who play more, but it's not that. So, for example, Spencer Strider, 131 and 2/3 innings, had 202 strikeouts last year. That ranks ahead of people who threw 200 innings. Mm-hmm. He had more strikeouts than Shane Bieber and Framber Valdez and Merrill Kelly, who all had 200 innings. Miles Michaelis. I mean, these are obvious names, and they're obviously at different ends of the spectrum, of the strikeout spectrum, but it helps me sort of understand that, like, if Spencer Strider throws 160 innings this year, and that's more likely, I think, than deGrom. I'm playing that game, right? If 160 innings, that seems more likely than deGrom throwing 160. Spencer Strider's a young guy. He hasn't really he had Tommy John once, but he hasn't had like a string of injuries. So if he gets to 160 innings, I think he wins the Cy Young. I think he has like 240 strikeouts and wins the Cy Young. You know who had 240 strikeouts last year? Burns and Cole.
You've made a convincing case. The other question I'd have with Strider is he was amazing last year with basically 2 pitches, 4-seamer slider. That's how he did it.
I've got a piece coming about that. And his perspective is just, if I have the 2 best pitches, it doesn't matter. Why should I throw that third other pitch? And I find that interesting. It's an interesting debate that people, really smart people. We talked about how James Click and the founder, Gary Huckabee, the founder of Baseball Prospectus, didn't agree on whether a starting pitcher needed 3 pitches to start. And I think Strider's right in the middle of it. And we did a whole back and forth. And one of the things I said was, you're mostly hard up top and slider down low, right? That's like that's where your pitches play the best. What happens if somebody just says, I'm spitting on everything slow and I'm targeting high and hard? Don't you think they can start to hit your fastball? And he goes, I can see that happening. And then I just start throwing some low fastballs. Because if they're spitting on everything low, they're going to take it, and then I get some take strikes. Now I got to make them swing at things that are low. If I got to make them swing the things that are low, here comes the slider, Right. Yeah. And so I think that, for me, the fact that Strider has above average location numbers is just as important as the stuff plus. Because we've seen Matt Brash come up with similar strikeout rates and similar stuff numbers to Strider and been like, ooh, Matt Brash. And I was guilty of just falling for Matt Brash because it was nasty, drippy stuff. And his location numbers were not good. And that's what happens is people start to spit on the slider because it's not in the zone that much. And then he can't command his fastball. And it's not as good as Spencer Strider's fastball. And, you are where we are now. But I don't think Spencer Strider is Matt Brash. And So that's why I'm pushing him to where I am. He's gonna have a bonkers strikeout rate. I think he's going to have great numbers. Then this year, where allowing contact is a no bueno, he's going to be the one who says, "I don't care. Nobody hits it over there where the shift is because nobody hits it." So like I think I would take Strider over Woodruff. And then Woodruff did have that weird Raynaud's syndrome.
Yeah,
which I was panicking about that when it happened, and then he just came back a couple weeks later and was like, "No, I'm cool." It's like, okay.
Yeah. Well, the symptoms are really similar to thoracic outlet, and thoracic outlet is such a long-term injury.
Yeah,
the pitcher actually has that going on. So, yeah, I think it is worth monitoring to see if there's anything else going on with Woodruff. It's a good point to bring that up because I think it's something that since he got over it reasonably quickly, I was pretty quick to just bury it, and it's a possible longer term thing that he has to stay on top of. And he pitches in a lot of colder environments, especially early in the season, right? I mean, that's just part of being in the Central. You're going to go on the road to Chicago. I think the Brewers open at Wrigley again this year. That's not exactly the ideal conditions for someone kind of fighting those symptoms. So it's a good point. Aaron Nola also
I also want to make the pitch for Woodruff.
Sure.
Because I actually think I'll have a lot of Woodruff. I think he's a great pitcher because I think Strider is going to have helium and is going to be basically an end of the second round pitch guy with deGrom. I think deGrom and Strider will separate themselves into second round starting pitchers. And with me kind of being okay with waiting till the third round, I think Woodruff will easily be the best pitcher available in the third round. And my case for him is just let me just look right here. That's WP stuff. I hate that. My pitch is this: four-seam fastball 123 stuff plus, changeup 120 stuff plus, sinker 113 stuff plus, slider 104 stuff plus, curveball 99 stuff plus. There are very few people that have one fastball that's above average by stuff plus. He has two. In terms of location plus, four-seam fastball 108, changeup 109, sinker 105, slider 104, curveball 108. So he is one of those kind of, they're very rare, but he's like a Tyler Anderson with Tyler Glasnow stuff.
That works.
Maybe not quite full on Tyler Glasnow stuff, but my point is he's one of these guys that has command of 5 pitches and can get you just on you don't know what pitch is coming, and then also has excellent stuff on all those pitches. And there are very few people at the top of the ranks that have as good a location as, for example, Aaron Nola has better location numbers, but he doesn't have the stuff with Brandon Woodruff. Kevin Gausman and Justin Verlander have similar locations and stuff. They're just a little bit older, but those are reasons why I have those 3 pitchers up pretty high.
Yeah, I think the ballpark for me has been something that's always maybe a little bit more careful with Aaron Nola in this range, even though the skills look stable. We see a lot of fluctuation with his ERA. His bad years are surprisingly bad, which I don't think the magnitude of that is fully explained by the ballpark. I do think maybe there's some questions about the defense behind him, and that could become more important with the new rules as well.
Yeah, he doesn't have that safety blanket of the shift. In comparison, Nola does have a knuckle curve, cutter, sinker, and fastball that all rate above average, but he's very similar to Woodruff, and I have him Woodruff 6th, Nola 7th. But in terms of the order of those pitches, his knuckle curve and cutter have better stuff plus than his sinker and his four-seamer. Whereas Brandon Woodruff's best pitch is his four-seam fastball, I believe. That's kind of fun, Yeah. I think that's and that's another thing. I'm waiting to really say this until Jordan Rosenblum's projections come out, but I have a feeling that fastball stuff plus is a good source of aging. The better your fastball stuff is, the longer you're going to age.
Yeah, I would suspect that for some of the older, still great pitchers that we see, Justin Verlander, cough, that you would have a very good fastball. You would have had a very good fastball for most of his career. Maybe now we're finally starting to see some actual decay, but everything
But
else
why
has
has
been
Justin
good.
Verlander been so good for so long? Because he had a great fastball. Everything, yes, he has these other good pitches too. But like, if he didn't have the fastball, he'd have to start hiding it, and he'd have to start becoming more of what you see these older pitches of throwing tons of junk and sneaking the fastball by. Justin Verlander's not sneaking the fastball by.
No, he is not. One of the tougher players for me in the early part of drafts is Shane McClanahan, not because I have any questions about the skills, but I think it's a little bit of the Jacob deGrom problem. It's not as extreme as far as the recent time missed, but we did see time on the IL last year for Shane McClanahan. 166 in the third innings ended up being the final tally, just under 200 Ks, excellent ratios. Are we comfortable projecting another step forward volume-wise for McClanahan, or do you think there's still some kid gloves concerns here just to keep his arm healthy?
It did not look good. Do you remember that? It did not look good. He was like, they had video of it where he's like throwing in the bullpen before a game and he like touches his shoulder and he's out. He just like walks off.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that seemed, I don't know. I maybe that's how it always happens, but like for some reason having the video, I was just like, ooh, that was very definitive. That wasn't like maybe, it was like he walked off the mound. So
he got back pretty quick though. I thought he'd be out for more than a month, and he was back within about 3 weeks.
How bad is an impingement? That's what they call it, an impingement, right?
Mm-hmm. Those last 4 starts that he made in the regular season were 5 innings, 4 innings, 5 innings, and 5 innings. The Ks were 5-3, 2, and 2. So it wasn't the same McClanahan at the end of the year that we saw for the months prior. That I think adds that little extra bit of risk that it's like I want to believe what I see in terms of how filthy he is when everything is good health-wise, but I don't know. If I'm going to sit here and say deGrom has to fall to just the right spot and then he has to prove this spring that everything is okay, I think I would need to see McClanahan throwing bullets again this spring too.
Yeah, and I wonder if, I don't know, does this make you feel better? His fastball stuff plus was decent when he came back. What really hurt him in the second half and in his return from injury was his slider stuff plus fell off. Early in the season, he was putting up 105s to 140s on the slider. Late in the season, he had 6 appearances with sub 100 stuff plus on the slider. So does that make you feel better or worse? I mean, I'm glad that the fastball stuff plus was there. I'm glad that the velo was pretty much there.
Probably a little better than having no information.
Yeah, I don't know. We also, when we reran the model, he went from a 118 stuff plus to 112. He's the biggest loser in my top. Wow, 30.
Ooh, yeah, that's a pretty big drop.
Whereas, some guys around him went up. deGrom went up amazingly. Woodruff went up. Nola went up. And the new model liked his fastballs a little better, which is interesting because we had like separate models basically for the fastball and the other ones. So, yeah, I have a down arrow on my McClanahan ranking. I started at some point with him like 3-4, right now I have him 9th. And I think what I start to run into though is, would you rather have an old man or Shane McClanahan?
Yeah, I think that's been reflected in where I've got him. I've got him 5th among starting pitchers as of right now. And it's deGrom, McClanahan being stuck together as 2 guys that I think are just awesome if they're healthy. And then Max Scherzer, the old guy, and then Strider.
Well, see, I have him ahead of Max Scherzer, but I have Max Scherzer 10th. Yeah, so I have a Scherzer, Gausman, Verlander, Rodón foursome where injury percentiles are pretty high. Verlander has a 98th injury percentile. Glasnow has a 98. Rodón is a 90. And then with Gausman, just a little bit of like, it hasn't always looked great. He's still kind of a 2-pitch guy. Yeah.
Here's the question I have for you with the injury risk also within this group is Carlos Rodón has been reasonably healthy the last 2 seasons, got a great contract from the Yankees, again, very happy for him. Given that it's been shoulder and elbow in the past, he scares me even more than deGrom. The only thing that I like better about Carlos Rodon is that you can get him at the 3-4 turn. You get him in the after
You
pick
can
40
bank
to
some
pick 50
batters
range.
first. Yeah.
You could have 2 hitters and come back, and you could get a guy that pitches like a top 3 to top 5 starter. I don't dispute that he has that. I think he just carries that elevated risk. So just quantifying it, I think you mentioned deGrom's injury risk was something in the 90th percentile range.
93rd, yeah.
How high is Rodon on that same
90?
measure?
So just close to deGrom, a little bit below, probably due to age.
Yeah.
And just raw numbers of days on the IL in the last couple of years. I mean, deGrom is through the roof.
Yeah. So he, as much as I can see it from a projection standpoint, and you get a better value on Rodon than deGrom, I think he's a guy that I'm kind of shying away from. I know Scherzer has missed his share of time. People are saying, well, you got Scherzer and inside your top 10, firmly inside your top 10, you'll take him, and he's older. Yeah, because he hasn't had that same level of a massive shoulder or elbow injury in any recent year, right? It's not this devastating
more like the
injury
drip of back, back and hamstring and just old man injuries, right?
Yeah, and I think that's more
plus
typical.
This in raw numbers, 179, 145 is not too bad.
No, well, it's still pretty good workload wise. So maybe you're projecting another 160 type innings. That's kind of where the Strider innings numbers are. And I think Scherzer can miss a lot of bats. He won't miss as many as Strider if you give them an equal number of innings, but there's a chance that Scherzer gives you more innings than Strider. And that for me is like why I would choose Scherzer over Strider if the prices were equal. I actually think the strikeout ceiling for Scherzer because of innings is just as high, if not higher. It's not easy.
Yeah, it's this sort of 10 to 15 is where I get a little queasy, and I don't think I'm going to have a lot of shares there. At least with Shane McClanahan, I can convince myself I got a young stud, and there's the possibility of 180 innings, with 230 type strike, like that's I can dream that up. I don't know that I can dream that up for Scherzer and Verlander, where I just more likely that there's going to be some maintenance IL stints, some kind of my back is barking moments, and maybe even just some management of workload where the Mets are like, we're going to the postseason, and we want these guys healthy for the postseason, so we're gonna give them 2 weeks off in August. When you're like, well, I need those innings. So I just don't know if I believe the innings from all of those. Rodón comes with a little bit of performance risk going to that park. It's so terrible, but at least he's a left-handed power pitcher that strikes people out. So not only is he not going to allow that many balls in play for the shift and for that ballpark, but he's also probably going to suppress, a lot, like, left-handers aren't going to go the yard off him that much. What is I never it's funny when I look up a split, I never look up, but I did just say this. I just normally I just assume that somebody like Rodón would just be murder on lefties. 238 WOBA against them last year. They had a 260 slugging lefties did last year. And for his career it's a 325 slugging. So he's pretty good against lefties. So I think he'll be fine in that ballpark. It's just more of an injury concern. So, but comparing injury concerns is when I think we sound our worst. We're not doctors, and we're just trying to fumble around in the dark, and we're just trying to help people. But full disclosure, I'm not a doctor. And I don't even play one on the radio. Yeah. And so I'm trying my best to sort of figure this out. I do think that we generally think elbows is concerning, but shoulder is most concerning. Backs can be concerning for the older guys. That sort of thing. Tyler Glasnow is a guy that I have 14th. And I think it's fair to put him in that group as what are the innings going to look like? I don't know. And he has a 98th, percentile injury risk. I get it. I understand why. The one thing that's great about him versus Noah Syndergaard came back and pitched a couple innings, when after his Tommy John, we knew right away that he was not the pitcher he used to be. The velo wasn't there. The stuff he didn't even throw a breaking ball, So we kind of had a sense of where he'd be the next year. And this last year, it was the same thing. He threw 94. His stuff wasn't as good. Tyler Glasnow came out last year and blew the doors off people's hinges. I mean, just in terms of the stuff plus numbers, they're through the roof, and they look like, he'd be basically right there with Felix Bautista because he was doing it in shorter stints and he's able to air it out. But it all looked good is what I'm saying. And the thing that worries me less about Glasnow compared to some of the other guys is Jeff Zimmerman had these findings about Tommy John honeymoons. And generally, if you come back to pitch and you make it all the way back and you have pitched, you have at least another sort of 250 to 300 innings before you're going to have another Tommy John, if in worst case scenario, right? So there's this kind of 300 inning, Tommy John honeymoon, as Zimmerman puts it.
Or a warranty. Like a warranty for the pitcher. You're good for about 300 more innings. And then maybe we'll see again. Hopefully we don't.
And he has a really big carrot, which is, he's a total free agent after next season. And if he can put together 350 innings over the next 2 seasons, that payday, the more every inning he gets over 300 over the next 2 seasons is worth like $10 million, I bet.
Yeah, right. I mean, think about the money Carlos Rodón just got. Glasnow should be able to top that, not only because it's going to be 2 years into the future, but also even with Tommy John, Glasnow's injury history is not as scary as Rodon's was.
As long as he comes back and does what Rodón does, has the healthy season,
He's capable of it.
So he has a lot running on the line, and I think he'll do it. I think if he puts together 140, 150 innings this year, think back to what I was saying about sorting by strikeouts. If he can do 150 innings, there's another name that I don't want to speak out of turn on the rundown, but Cristian Javier was 14th in strikeouts last year in 148 innings. Tyler Glasnow can do that.
Right. That's the appeal. And I think Glasnow being available, at least for now, I think he's going to move up quite a bit. Another guy that once he's out there this spring and he's throwing and everything looks good, he's going to jump up a few rounds. The most competitive rooms out there could easily make him someone that fits into the group that we're talking about right now. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we get to the end of March. And
because he's not there by ADP, right? I have him 14th by my rankings, but he's not there by ADP.
I think plenty of people are going to be on board with that. So this is a great time to draft Glasnow if you're doing early drafts and he's someone that you would expect to see at least near the back part of the group we're talking about right now as we move a little further into the season. The Dylan Cease lack of love between the two of us is probably for the same reason. For me, it's just the walks. I worry that the walks can come back to bite him, lower the ratios in a way where he struggles to return enough value here. The Ks are going to be there. It's a bit like, more extreme. Robbie Ray in his early career was a more extreme example of Dylan Cease. I think Cease is a little more steady with his command than early career Robbie Ray. Blake Snell is probably a good example, right? We've seen Blake Snell over the years as a guy with really good stuff, with that high walk rate. When it's good, Cy Young level. When it's not good, SP4. And then you paid a fringe like SP1 sort of price to get it. So for me, Dylan Cease is a guy that the room always likes more than I do. And much like Sandy in the little tier before this, probably a guy that I miss out on completely.
Yeah, I mean, he helped me to that points record in AL Labor last year. Him and McClanahan were my horses, and I thank him for that. But the reason he was cheap before is still the reason I would want to get him cheap again, and that's not going to happen this year. It's the walks. Another way of saying it is location plus. He's the only player. I guess Shohei Ohtani counts, but Shohei Ohtani's location plus was better. But he's the only player that I have in my top 25 with a location plus that low. So it's, one thing that I like to do with the conditional formatting is just give me a bunch of greens and reds so that the reds stick out. And it's really the only red in my top 25. And that's going to push you down. And why do I say top 25? Because there's a couple reds that happen at 25 and 26 in Shane Bieber and Max Fried's Stuff Plus, which they're easily the worst Stuff Plus in my top 30. And so, I try to use the ADP and the projected amounts to not push someone who got too far down. So I'm not going to push Dylan Cease like way far down, but that red flag is the ballast that pulls him below. I have him below someone like, sorry to say it again, Cristian Javier. And Cristian Javier has similar stuff. He has a smaller arsenal, but he has slightly better than league average location. That's why pitching plus is still a column that I have. I try not to hew only to stuff plus. Cristian Javier's pitching plus is better than Dylan Cease's. And that considers platoon splits, that considers command of different pitch types, it considers the size of your arsenal, and it says Javier is better than Cease. So I'm going to go with that because it is sometimes worrisome to see like a 3.8 walks per 9. That's going to be your ace. I don't know. That's a little bit worrisome. There's no other person we're talking about that could be your first starting pitcher that's going to have a walk rate around 4. He has for his career, he's 4.02.
Yeah, looking at the back part of this group real quick, Verlander, Rodón, who we talked about already, Zack Wheeler, and Julio Urías. Urías has some pretty surprisingly poor projections in pretty much all the projection systems. Ratios that are worse than you expect. K rate's a little bit low, a bit of the Sandy problem, I guess, in that regard. Team context is good. I don't think we're as worried about at all, really, about how the Dodgers manage his innings. It's more of a question of physical health because of earlier career arm injuries that he dealt with. With Wheeler, lower K rate than expected. I know he had a lower stuff number in the previous run of the model than I would have expected for what I see when I watch him, but I'm not a scout. It's just an observation.
Who's that?
Zack Wheeler.
Yeah. He improved the model, liked him a little better after we looked at him. And I think that's interesting because for him separating the fastballs and the breaking balls into different models might be pretty meaningful. He has a really good fastball, and Stuff Plus said 98 on the fastball, and I don't really believe that almost, Mm-hmm. Like, is there a way that Zack Wheeler's fastball is below average? I don't think so. So the new Stuff Plus likes it better. And he is, like I said, with Woodruff and Nola, he's one of those guys who has a large arsenal, can command them, and has stuff. And that's just going to be something I always love. I have him 15 right now behind Glasnow, just because Glasnow is going to strike everybody out and Wheeler might not. But Wheeler is somebody I'd still be happy to get, especially if I did some sort of get two number 2s. I could go, even though I have Wheeler behind Glasnow. This is why you have to also think about ADPs in your draft. I have Wheeler behind Glasnow, but I could do a thing where in my draft I took Wheeler and then Glasnow to try and get.
To play it that way because that's the order that they're likely to go right now.
Yeah. Just with the Glasnow ranking, I'm trying to tell you how much I like him. With Julio Urías, I think there's a couple of things we shouldn't just gloss over quickly that are very interesting. Is that if you look at the Dodgers, the batting average, they lead the league in batting average on balls in play allowed. So they lead the league in BABIP allowed as pitchers. If you change the you use the sorting mechanism, right? So it's like this year, or this year plus this year, last year plus this year, or 3 years plus all the way. You know what I mean? Like, no matter how far back you look, collectively, they have the lowest BABIP allowed. So when I say that, I'm like, okay, so for over the last 15 years, Dodgers have had the lowest BABIP allowed. The first thing that comes to mind is like a stadium issue, right?
Sure.
But that stadium doesn't really play super pitcher friendly. And I don't, it has been a couple different regimes. You can't just be like, oh, it's all Friedman. But they have gone from being like, hey, leading the league at 285 to, over the last couple of years, the BABIP allowed by the Dodgers. Let me see here if I can do this. Team stats, last 2 years, BABIP allowed 258, dude. Like, that's not just a stadium. And look who's at the bottom. It's the Dodgers, the Astros, the Yankees, the Brewers, the Guardians, and the Rays. Could you put together a more analytic focused group?
No, not really. The question is, with the new rules, we still assume that these teams are going to probably lead the way with the new shift rules, right? Even though you can't
Right.
play the defenders the same way,
Brilliant.
you can
Like,
still play them somewhere. You
even
can
though
still
we have
choose.
identified this thing and we think it's a shift, what about going forward?
Yeah, does it just mean that their advantage compared to the field is smaller than it was, even though they're still going to be among the best in the league at positioning defenders?
Yeah, they're going to have like a 280 instead of a 260, basically.
But if everyone's going up, right? If balls in play are going to be rewarded across the board more, or at least everywhere, you're going to see more balls in play turn into hits. Are they still going to have a comparative advantage based on how they play? I tend to err on the side of believing they will.
How they will. But then if you go back to the specific players, Urías' BABIPs over the last few years, 257, 256, 272, 229.
229, jeez.
229, right. And I had a lively discussion with someone online about how that's player based. And I have a more that's Urías and not the Dodgers. And I was saying there's got to be a Dodgers effect too. Because a 258 team BABIP, and you've got Urías. Are you going to give Urías, Gonsolin, and Kershaw all of that? Are you going to just be like, those three guys are just amazing at suppressing results and balls in play, and it's not a team thing? I'm not going to do that because they've only thrown about 35% of the innings for the team, over the last 2 years. And we still got a 258 BABIP here to consider. So I think there's a team effect and separately there's a player effect. Of course, it meshes together, right? The team prepares a defense for the player. So there is a meshing of like, we think this player has the ability to produce balls in play, and we've made a plan that was with him. Now, there are a bunch of analysts out there that think very stridently that there's nothing a player can do about balls in play. I obviously don't fully agree with them, and the reason that I say obviously is the Stuff Plus model is trained on RA9. It's trained on all results. So just by deciding to train my model against all results as opposed to training it just against whiffs, I've made a choice that yes, some of these guys can suppress balls in play, and I think Urías's big old curveball is really hard to hit. You know what I mean? Like, I do think that's part of it, is that Julio Urías has a great sweeping curveball that is super hard to hit. I am obviously also stalling to get you some actual numbers on it, but here we go. The curveball for his career, he's thrown 2,700 curveballs. People are hitting 197 with the 133 slugging against 133 ISO against it. So they know this thing is coming. They're trying to hit it and they can't. So, Urías' curveball, and that's a curveball that's changed a couple of times. This last year, very similar numbers, 203 average, same deal. So I do that, but do I believe that he's going to have a 229 BABIP again? And the projections that you reference that aren't that great have 290 BABIP from Steamer and a 403 ERA. The bat seems to more willing to believe the BABIP allowed and has a 267 BABIP for him and a 364 ERA. So I'm already leaning closer to the bat, and I'm saying it could be even lower than that. So also the bat's projected strikeout rate is low for me. So if you take the bat and you give him a strikeout per inning, then I believe him, and that's going to be like a 3.3 ERA, I think. So Urías is someone I totally believe in, and if I had to do something where I didn't even get the Glasnow Wheeler connection, or if I did do Glasnow Wheeler, I would love to take Urías or Gallen to make it a threesome.
All right. So you'd be looking at three pitchers probably in about the first 6 rounds based on where those guys all go. But none of those guys going in the first 2 rounds. You'd have a couple really good hitters up there, 3 starters, maybe even your first closer all sprinkled in there. It'd
be an interesting start, but I think I could do that. If I got 2 really stud hitters that both hit for average and hit homers and got steals, I could come out of the first couple of rounds with 40 homers, 50 homers, and 40 steals and a 280 average, then I feel like I could get 4 pitchers in a row, especially because I'd be making up for the fact that I didn't get a Woodruff or a Burns or Cole by Glasnow, Wheeler, Gallen, Glasnow, Wheeler, Urías. I'm into that.
I think the last pitcher to talk about from this group, and this will be a longer episode because it's pitcher week. Why wouldn't it be?
Mm-hmm.
Justin Verlander, coming off Tommy John, comes back, fires 175 innings of 175 ERA and .83 whip, just over a strikeout per inning, and comes back and gets a 2-year deal with the Mets. He'll turn 40 in the second half of February. I feel like his age is basically the only argument against him. I mean, the workload coming off Tommy John was as much as you can ask for. He reeled off 4 straight 200 inning seasons before getting hurt. And yeah, maybe you're not getting the 300 strikeout ceiling that he had in 18 and 19, but he's still really damn good. And if I'm getting him around pick 45, pick 50, I am very happy to take him there. I'm taking Verlander over Rodón. I'm taking Verlander over Wheeler. I'm taking Verlander over Urías too, because I just think there's a better pitcher there.
That's what I have. That's how I have it. I have Verlander 12, but should I have Verlander ahead of Scherzer?
There's certainly a case for it. Those two guys on the same team again, pushing each other as old men. Like, I hope someday if they ever remake Grumpy Old Men, I hope it's Scherzer and Verlander playing just ice fishing together and just absolutely just pure hatred for each other.
Trying to demolish the other one at Tiddlywinks. Just like cribbage, throwing down the cards, playing cribbage and throwing down the cards in a huff.
Awesome. Yeah, that's what I want to see someday.
I'm just from our conversation about Scherzer, just looking at these, like, I don't know, man. With ADP, I guess maybe I should keep Verlander behind Scherzer. But I don't know. I think I could take Verlander over Scherzer. He pitched 175 innings last year. He pitched 223 in 2019, and the rest is Tommy John. It seems like you might get more innings out of Verlander. If you're going to get more innings out of him, this stuff has the only thing that I can say negative about Verlander is the stuff has sort of declined a little bit.
But it was year one coming off of Tommy 39. John. Like, if he weren't 40.
And it wasn't bad. It wasn't like Noah Syndergaard or anything. Like, he still had an above average fastball stuff plus. And, with the new model, he had a 114 stuff plus. Like, he belongs up here.
I mean, fastball velo was basically the same as it was before he got hurt. The fact that didn't come down
Lost a little ride on it.
Little ride, okay. Also, very pitcher-friendly environment that he's going into now, too. So that even cushions things more.
Oh, pitcher-friendly. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So it's better.
Yeah, Citi Field is fantastic for him.
But that doesn't differentiate him from Scherzer. Scherzer, I think the comparison for Scherzer is just really, who do you think is going to get more innings? And I think I would guess Verlander.
Yeah, I like how I'm talking myself into moving Verlander up even higher, or flipping him with Scherzer, or moving Scherzer down and having them.
Who would you rather have, Gausman, Scherzer, or Verlander? Or what are those three?
I go Scherzer, Verlander, Gausman entering the pod, and now it's like Scherzer versus Verlander, and then Gausman, regardless of order for the first two.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
A 40-year-old who just had a great season coming off Tommy John surgery, and it's like, maybe we got to move this guy up. That is unreal.
I mean, we just referenced the Tommy John honeymoon for Tyler Glasnow. Then we should have it for Verlander too. Plus, Verlander it seemed like better health. I mean, what was the last surgery he had before Tommy John? It was like the core surgery he had in Detroit in like 2014 or something, 2015.
Yeah, it was a while ago. So yeah, I mean, is whatever the highest grade for health that you can give a 40-year-old who had Tommy John surgery.
I mean,
whatever that number
is not good. Zimmerman's is 98th percentile, but I think it's got to be better than that.
Yeah, maybe that's the error in my own ways. Let's move on to the next cluster. This is basically the pick 60 to pick 80 guys. Shane Bieber, Luis Castillo, Kevin Gausman goes in this range. Alek Manoah, Cristian Javier, who you mentioned a bit earlier, Zack Gallen, and Max Fried all go here. There's not much that separates this group from the group that comes behind them either. So we're just kind of putting them into smaller groups to make it a little easier to break them down. So Bieber, a pain point for you a year ago, or a pain point for the model at least, maybe both, but Where do we go from here? Like, do you double down? Do you say, no, I was right. the outcome was wrong. I'm gonna go and stay away from Bieber again, because at least he looks like he's kind of got back into that borderline workhorse sort of level that made him partially was what made him so good to begin with.
Yes. However, if you want some red, it's the worst stuff plus, in my top 26 or top 25, top 26. Actually, my worst stuff plus, you have to go. It's like my worst stuff plus in the top 50. I have to go down to like Joe Ryan to get worse. So I'm not. I did use ADP and the bat projections to keep them higher up, so there was a point at which I could not, even despite my model, look away and pick somebody else. And that for me was around 25 among starting pitchers. I'm still not going to end up with him because he goes 15th, but it does kind of is instructive for like how I'm trying to rank these guys. I got a $17 projection from him. The highest you could push him is about 16th. So even by projections, who right now don't care about Stuff Plus and are going to get better, they're going to get better results for Shane Bieber. Even projections say you're kind of taking him pretty aggressively at 15.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same side here because we spend so much time looking at the player pool together and talking through these issues. The model is a big part of how I want to rank players and look at the projections the same as everyone else and trying to just fit pieces right. I think Urías versus Bieber is kind of a toss-up. I think that's where ADP has them too, because Urías is the end of the last group. Bieber's the beginning of this group. I'd prefer Urias's skills by a reasonable margin. Not a landslide, but if I'm there with that choice, I'm not really thinking twice about it. And
Urias's fastball did get a little bit worse last year, and it was below average. But I mean, you could look away from our model and just look at the bat projections. Julio Urías has better projections than Shane Bieber by like 50 cents. And Luis Castillo, who goes right behind Bieber, has a better projection for the bat by $6. Kevin Gausman has a better projection by 50 cents. So there are players, and then Cristian Javier has a very similar projection, but my model loves him much more. So that let me look at Gallen similar, but my model loves him more. So either the pitching plus model loves guys right behind him more, or projections love him more, or both. And so I'm just not going to go even at that ADP. Urías, Castillo, Gausman, and Javier are ahead of him.
Gausman is someone you've got a bit ahead of the market. I think you had him at 11 in your rankings just by
moved him down to 12 because of our conversation about Verlander and Scherzer.
Oh, man, that's a slight bump. But ADP has him about 17th among starting pitchers as of right now. So he would be trending more into the guys you're likely to get category. The issue I guess I had was the ratios last year were surprisingly bloated. The whip in particular, a 124 whip. That's easily the worst that we saw from anybody going among the top 25 pitchers coming off the board. So what went wrong? Was it bad luck? And you must think in some way this is correctable. So I guess what's your case for Gausman to belong closer to that elite group where he's kind of you waited, but he's your SP1 as opposed to he's a clear SP2, which is where a lot of people seem to see him.
I mean, I'm just looking at a 363 BABIP allowed for him. That seems pretty aggressive, no matter what you think of the defense behind him and the fact that maybe he's more of a 2-pitch pitcher or 2.5 pitch pitcher. I mean, really, last year he started to throw the slider more. Does that lead to more of a high BABIP because the slider's not as good? It was the most he'd ever thrown his slider, I guess. But at the same time, what do you want? You keep telling him he's a 2-pitch pitcher and needs his third pitch. He threw the third pitch more. I would just say, even if you think he has a true talent ability to allow hard contact because he has a 314 career BABIP, 363 is aggressive. That's a lot. So I'm just expecting that BABIP to come down. And for the most part, the projections really like him, and they like him better than a starting a number 2 starting pitcher.
I guess for me, my skepticism comes from, even though the velocity on the four-seamer is good, 95 miles an hour last year, the league hit 333 and slugged 483 against Gausman's four-seamer last year. That's the part that's really holding me back from. There's going to be good correction, good regression on the BABIP, almost certainly. That's a ridiculous BABIP for a guy with these skills. But I think I'm not pushing him as far back as some folks would, unless we believe that four-seamer will be more effective.
Yeah, and it's fair because he seems to go in up and down cycles based on that four-seamer. There's a lot of pressure on that four-seamer, right? Because the splitter is not a pitch that you can command that well, as our friend Nick Pollock just talks about. We should give some love to Pitchapalooza coming up this weekend, put on by Pitcher List. We'll both be involved on Friday. And he's not a big fan of the splitter because he doesn't think you can command it. And I think even just doing the mechanics of it, I think you can see how it might be a really tough, hard pitch to command. So that's part of why he's throwing the slider more, as a pitch he can throw in the zone. He can put in the zone, and if they're sitting in the zone or just not swinging on anything low, then he can use the slider to throw it in the zone and command it well. So I think he's come up with some mitigation strategies, and yet at the same time, there's so much pressure on that four-seamer because that's what makes everything go. And we've seen, over time, there's been times when the four-seamer loses some ride. And I remember, I wrote a piece about whether or not 2 pitches is enough. And if Gausman is showing us the 2 pitches is enough for the Athletic last year with the Giants. No, 2 years ago with the Giants. And one thing that when I focused on that was just how important the vertical movement was for him. And at the time, it was down a little bit, but with the Blue Jays, his vertical ride is up. It looks like it's in good shape. And I think the four-seamer is good to go, especially because the velo is there. So I'm thinking it's mostly going to be a regression in terms of what happens with balls in play for Kevin Gausman.
Interesting. So the guy that I like kind of at market in this group is Luis Castillo. After the delayed start last season, I think just getting out of Great American Ballpark, the home run park factors difference alone, taking a guy with those skills, putting him into T-Mobile Park instead of Great American Ballpark for a season, that was a big boost to his baseline. I love Castillo. I was really encouraged by 150 innings after he came off the IL, so we didn't really see any lingering effects of that arm injury that he was dealing with. I still think he's really solid as like a top 15 starting pitcher. I think if I were drafting as my first starter, I'm getting my second and my third reasonably quickly just to make sure that I'm set though for ratios and for Ks.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of upside within considering that his strikeout rate went from 25.8% with Cincinnati to 28.9% with Seattle. All of the results were really excellent. And he goes from a tough park to a nice park. And we're going to see more benefits of that as he sort of meshes his approach, Luis Castillo does, to his new ballpark. Part of that we've already seen, I think. He threw the changeup less and less with Seattle as time went on, and threw the slider more. And so, it's becoming more of a four-seam slider, heavy approach. And I think we saw some slight changes in velo and movement. The slider got harder when he was with Seattle, and he got harder and had more drop. So that's a pretty good combo. That's basically what you want out of your slider. So Luis Castillo has his projections based on what he's done, and then I think a little bit of a tiny up arrow based on new coaching with Seattle, new ballpark, slight changes in his arsenal that were good. So I'm all systems go on Luis Castillo. Yeah.
Lowest walk rate since 2018. We saw a lower ground ball rate too, probably in part because you don't have to try and get as many ground balls when you're not in Cincinnati. You can do different things. Fly balls aren't going to hurt you as much. So I do think there was probably some
more sliders, more whiffs. Yeah.
More conscious changes there that led to that shift in profile. And this is going to work just fine for him with that being his new home ballpark. One of the more perplexing guys from a projections perspective, Alek Manoah. This is a pitcher that people generally really like. The ratios last year were outstanding. A 2.24 ERA, a .99 WHIP in 196 and 2/3 innings. Only, air quotes, only 180 Ks. That's a tick low. What do we do with Manoah, a guy that Steamer had up over 4 for the ratios projection for the ERA? The bat has him down at 373 with a 117 WHIP, which is totally fine as an SP2, but probably a pretty far cry from what people were expecting given the way his big league career has started.
Yeah, and the bat is mostly giving him those better projections based on a 266 BABIP after being 246 his first year and 244 his second year. So you can see that the home runs are projected to go up, and he's supposed to get a little bit less luck on balls in play going forward. And the Steamer has a 286 BABIP, and that's mostly why it's up over 4 for the ERA for Alek Manoah. I don't know, man. My model had 103 stuff, 99 location, 101 pitching plus, and then when we reran the model, 101 stuff plus, 99 location, 100. It just keeps spitting out slightly above average starter, which is a little perplexing because Manoah has been better than that. But that explains when you have the projections and the model kind of, shaking hands, it's really hard to push him up high. So I have him, Manoah is in my trio of shame. It goes Manoah, Bieber, Fried for me at 24, 25, 26, where it's just like, maybe I'm just going to be wrong, but I'm looking at projections. I'm looking at my model, and both projections and the model don't like those 3 pitchers as much as the pitchers that around them.
Since you mentioned Fried being part of that group, what do you think it is about Fried that kind of shoves him down in this range?
It's a poor fastball. It's not a fastball that rates well. But he does well with it. And I don't know what the secret is. Player, let me look at it by pitch. I don't like, what would it be missing? He's fairly normal. Like, he throws a big old curveball. The fastballs aren't amazing. The slider was a kind of an addition. Maybe what if we're wrong on the changeup? There's a 400. He threw 400 changeups last year. It says 99 stuff plus, 103 location, 105. It says it's an above average changeup, but not like a real weapon. And the model is not amazing at changeups. So let's say his changeup was much better. He'd still kind of be a guy with a big curveball, a really good changeup, and then not great fastballs. And that's not someone that I want to put in my top 15, top 20, because it's just he's somebody who's going to age earlier. That's why age becomes a consideration with this. It's just going to age earlier because his fastball's not as good. And I think that's part of why we heard some rumors that he might be traded. It's not that he's not great right now. It's just that they don't want to extend him. They've extended everybody. They extended Spencer Strider. They could have extended Max Fried. So the marketplace is telling us a little something. More evidence says forcing fastballs not good. It has 4 inches less ride than pitches at the similar velocity. 94 miles an hour is no longer above average velocity, really. Even for starters, 93.5 is now average. So he's basically got average velo and below average ride. And the sinker has 4 inches less sort of arm side fade than most sinkers. So neither one of his fastballs has good movement. I think he commands it all right, and he has a real bulldog mentality on the mound, and that's part of it. Maybe there's some deception we're not capturing about how he shows the ball, and maybe the changeup is better than my model has it. But in some, I don't see something there where I'm like, oh, that's where we must be wrong, and the projections say good but not great as well.
Yeah, I know it can be slippery to look at the results on an individual pitch for one season, especially when that pitch is thrown, 400 times like that changeup. But as far as average, slugging against, and even whiff percentage, the savant whiff percentage, the changeup was just about as effective as the curveball for Fried last year. So if that continues, that could be one of the ways he continues to sort of exceed expectations. The deeper arsenal
slugging on the changeup. I mean, that could be where the model's missing, but it's 375 slugging on the four seam. I don't think it's missing on that. I think it's not a great pitch.
This is more the ingredients for like another future. You've used Hyunjin Ryu as someone with the deep arsenal that finds a way to make it work, and he doesn't have quite the same injury woes that Ryu has had over the course of his career too. So the other thing that's weird about
Ryu
Fried,
also didn't get ace money, and like Fried may be headed towards ace money, depending on who signs it.
Fried's older than you think. Or Shane Bieber's younger than you think. Bieber turns 28 in May. Fried's already 29, which how old's Max Fried? I would have said 26, 27. It would have been off the top of my head where I was at.
Did he have some injuries in the minors?
Yep. He had Tommy
also
John.
Been in the big leagues since 2017.
He's been around a little longer than you think. A little delayed because of an injury in the minors.
Yeah.
But I don't, it feels like we're piling on a guy that isn't. He's not bad. There's nothing wrong with him, but you have to make choices.
309 ERA with 117 whip and 632 innings. I would just have to say that, he really has 3 full seasons on his resume, and one was mediocre and the other 2 were great. I don't think that's enough to throw away projections and throw away models.
No, I don't think so either. How about Zack Gallen, where everything except for 2021 has been really good? Under a 3 ERA when he debuted in 19 in the shortened 2020 season and over a full season in 2022. 2.54 ERA last season, career best .91 whip, lower strikeout rate, 192 Ks and 184 innings. We've always liked him because he seemed like a guy that would do better with his walk rate. That finally was borne out over a season in 2022, right? It was a guy that had good command and yet walked more guys than he should have. Far from an overpowering arsenal. That's always been Gallen. It's been a little more of pitch mix and finesse than guy that was going to come in and blow you away. But the velocity was up a little bit last year on the fastball too. So how does Gallen fit into this conversation, and what kind of keeps him maybe a notch above Fried for you?
He's a baby Woodruff for me. I mean, the four seam has really good shape, and with that added velo and the added location, it's just he profiles out to his best pitch, the four seam. I kind of like that. So maybe Fried's secondaries are better in terms of stuff, but where Gallen really steps forward is then locating those secondaries. So his four seamer is 94.1, comparable to Fried's. However, it has 5 inches more ride than Fried's compared to the population as a whole. So really good four-seamer, and then really good location. He locates the four-seam, the cutter, the slider, the changeup, and the knuckle curve all really well. Not talking like 101 or something, like 108, 110, 122 on the slider. He didn't even throw the slider that much. If he figures out that cutter slider situation there and has 2 pitches there, then you could have legit 4 secondary pitches he can command really well, and then a fastball that has really good shape. So, I think he's kind of a baby Woodruff for me. Really good fastball, lots of pitches, good enough stuff on those pitches. It's not quite a spruced up Ryu. A spruced up Ryu would be, I think, what we're looking with Fried a little bit. But Fried doesn't have that command of all his pitches. So that's the important part of Ryu, and I think Gallen has that command. There's been a little bit of at 94.1 with the fastball, is it soft? Could that fastball fall off quickly? And I think that is possible. But right now, Gallen is 27 years old. I think he's primed for his peak season. Yeah,
if we didn't just see his best one, then I'm really interested to see what could be even better. It could be the K rate that actually ticks up slightly over the course of the season too. But love to see the improvements, the consolidation of a lot of skills that were flashed at various points earlier in his career from Gallen. Last pitcher in this group, you mentioned him earlier, Cristian Javier, slightly underpriced where he's been going in early drafts. I mean, clearly no real concerns about job security going into this year, given how well he fared moving back into the rotation a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, he's a baby Strider in terms of he has 2 pitches that rate really well, and then another 2 pitches. But he's so good at the fastball slider thing that, and he has good enough command of them that this total lack of command when it comes to the changeup and the knuckle curve is not as important. It would be nice if he could command. If there is a step forward for him, is just doing enough work with the knuckle curve to command it, so that if someone is finding a way to sit on his four-seamer slider, or he could throw something that is obviously doesn't look like his four-seamer slider and that they'll probably take, and then he could throw those knuckle curves in the zone for called strikes. I think that could take his game another level. I mean, right now he's just blowing things by people, but we saw how good he can be in the postseason. I think that's meaningful for me, is that, this guy went through some of the best lineups in baseball, 12 2/3 innings with a .71 ERA last year in the postseason. So if you add that to what he did during the regular season, you got 160 innings with how many strikeouts combined? If you add them in, where is that?
It'd be over 200.
Yep. 210. And I still have my leaderboard up, sorted. 210 would have been 8th most in the big leagues, and more than Sandy Alcantara. So,
what's pretty funny is that the numbers for Javier as a starter are slightly better than his numbers as a reliever. Even 3 ERA as a starter, 3.21 out of the pen, not that much of a difference. A 175, 260, 337 line against him as a starter. It's 190, 303, 336 out of the pen. So it's working just fine for him in the longer role.
He's like, there is this new kind of like, what if we just had a closer for 5 innings philosophy going around baseball. And that's I'd put Strider in that with Cristian Javier. Do you think there's a lot of other guys? Maybe Hunter Green will be like that.
I mean, am I wrong? Maybe this is part of my
Glasnow
error in my ways with Dylan. Is Dylan Cease like that a little bit?
Yeah, Cease is like that.
Maybe that's why it's working, because if I like Cristian Javier, I shouldn't dislike Dylan Cease. It's more of a question of where they're drafted. Javier feels like a bargain. Cease feels like an overpay, in part because the other one exists. But it's like, let's take a closer. Let's take an elite closer's arsenal with at least average command and just let them start and say, this is better than back-end starters of the past who had 4 pitches and none of those pitches were good.
Yeah. I think that's why there is
chunky, so he should pitch a lot of innings.
I think that's why the location plus is meaningful for me in this, where Cease has 97 location plus, Javier has a 101, Glasnow has a 103, Hunter Green even has a 101. So all the guys I mentioned as, and Strider's 101. So all the guys I mentioned as these 5-inning relievers, Cease has the worst location plus out of all of them.
All right, one more cluster, and then we're out for day 1 of pitcher week. A group of still SP2s, as I'm calling them. They're going in the pick 80 to 100 range. This includes Joe Musgrove, Darvish, Framber, Valdez, Triston McKenzie creeping up ADP-wise this draft season, and Tyler Glasnow in this group for now, as we said earlier, probably taking off ahead of them as we speak. So Glasnow is so good. If you have a late draft position and you're picking at the round 5, round 6 turns, you're talking about pick 75, 76, that's your window. That's it. You cannot wait another turn. He will not be there when it comes back.
And with dollars to donuts.
I love both.
We do what we speak. We both just took Tyler Glasnow in that range.
We should absolutely have donuts during pitcher week. I'm going to Chuck's a little bit later, but Musgrove,
they got to bring their dollars. Let me see. where I took him exactly. I took him in the 6th.
Yeah, probably
mid 6th.
early mid 6th.
So yeah, so it's on 80, 85. Is that 85?
Yeah,
5 times 15 is 75. So
I took him at
85.
76. And there's a break in starting pitching. I took Glasnow. Someone else took Framber Valdez. Our friend Jeff Erickson was in that draft. He took Valdez. And there was a long break for the rest of round 6. No other pitchers taken. Then McKenzie went at the 6-7 turn to Ryan Bloomfield, a few closers. Then we got to the guys we're going to start the next episode with. So there does seem to be a small cliff in how the room plays. And I think most people see Glasnow belonging in that group.
Yeah, there were only 3 pitchers after Glasnow. There was only 3 starting pitchers in the next 30 picks. So he is kind of, I think, a great, I think a lot of times you want to like pick somebody at the end of a tier. I think that's good. You think that he's slightly comparable to the other guys and you paid less than everybody else.
I think so. Glasnow compares favorably to top 10 pitchers. Like I did
move Musgrove down as we were talking. I had him like in the low 20s. I think he fits a little better after my trio of shame because he also does not have good fastball stuff plus. And I think that's what we saw at the end of the season. He's responded already by doing the old pitcher trick of just throwing more breaking balls. I even saw him in at the All-Star game, and I said, "What's been your big adjustment that made you better?" And he said, "Oh, just spinning the ball a lot more." So he's been a guy who is throwing tons and tons of sliders, and I don't have a story for you on how he gets better. I only have a story for you as he gets worse. And so I've pushed him now behind Manoah, Bieber, and Fried. I think comparing him to Darvish is pretty tough.
I actually prefer Darvish if I'm making the choice between the two. I clearly one of my tendencies is I don't worry about guys in their late 30s. You made it this far, you're still healthy, your velocity is still good, your pitches are still good, you are still good. And from a ratios perspective, the ERA last year looks like last year, 2021, that 4.22 ERA, that looks like kind of the worst case scenario. He was pitching hurt at the end of the season, comes right back and had his highest innings total since 2013. So durability here again, kind of like Darvish. Yeah. It's like that conditional, like this is pretty good durability for a guy in his late 30s. And the home park, it's a nice place to pitch. I like that. I like that the control, which was a problem earlier in his career, that has not been a problem for him really for several years, but he's become good in that department. Very good with control. And early in his career, we looked at him as a guy that had a bit of a walks problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that mostly the way he solved that walks problem was by not throwing the pitches he couldn't command so well. And so he's kind of really figured out, I think, his pitch mix better. He used to throw 40% four-seam fastballs. Now he throws 20%. And it says he throws 45% sliders. I think that's his cutter. It's a hard pick. I'm not speaking ill on anybody's pitch mix describer. You know what I'm saying? Like I think it's a hard mix to kind of get right and figure it out. But he throws 45% cutters now, and I think he can actually command that pitch pretty well. And that's helped him reduce the homers, I think, and reduce the walks. But it also means that he's kind of a bad fastball starter, right? Darvish, bad fastball starter?
A little bit.
Yeah. So that worries me a little bit. You getting a top 15 guy in terms of raw strikeouts, I think, is a good place to start.
Yeah,
with Darvish, and that team is going to get better. I never look at wins, but he had 16 wins last year. That's a good number too. Is it a good
lineup?
Number?
Good bullpen. Oh, 16. Yeah, you're happy with 16 wins for sure.
Only Framber, Julio, Urías, Verlander, and Kyle Wright had more. Kyle Wright had 21 wins. Crazy.
Framber Valdez, good time to bring him up. The ERA last year got under 3, over 200 innings, so valuable. A 116 whip, not usually the whip you see next to a sub-3 ERA. A good number of strikeouts because of that volume. skills growth here in the form of really the best walk rate that we've seen from Framber over the course of his career. But I think with the new rules, just thinking again about the conversation a little earlier in this episode, an extreme ground baller. Is he more impacted by shift rules than the typical pitcher?
I would think so. The one thing that I do like is he's a left-hander, so he's going to suppress those lefties trying to take advantage of the new shift rules. The other thing I like is the emergence of his cutter. Last year, 351 cutters thrown by the Stuff Plus metric. That had a 142 Stuff Plus on that cutter. So that is a legitimate pitch that he's now added. He always seemed to be like a guy who had a curveball and nothing else to me, because his sinker is pretty good, but I don't think it's real a standout pitch, more of a near league average pitch. But with such a great curveball, he was I thought he was like a young Adam Wainwright in a way. I know that they throw with different hands and they're not the same kind of pitcher, but I thought that was basically what Framber's career is going to look like. Was here's my curveball. Everything you are thinking as a hitter is about whether or not that curveball's coming. But that cutter emerging as a real standout pitch, there's a possibility he could strike more batters out next year. Mm-hmm. Usually what you find with guys, like think about Luis Castillo. He could get ground balls, but now he's got the best slider of his career. Why wouldn't he throw that and get a whiff and just be sure of it? And if this cutter kind of continues to emerge as it has, it's going to give him the ability to get whiffs as well. And so he'll have this choice about, well, do I get the ground ball or do I just take a whiff? So I could see him striking out more guys. He's also just because of that curveball, Wainwright is a guy who I think is undervalued year to year. We've seen him get really low contracts in the major leagues. We've seen him play really well into his late his career, Wainwright. And Valdez has a curveball that's as good as his. And so when you have something like that, it's a really important weapon.
Yeah, I think the changes over time from Framber have really sort of changed his baseline, but have also shown that there's probably a higher ceiling there than we thought when he first broke in. I think I saw him as a back end of the rotation ground ball machine earlier in his career. I didn't think he'd reach this level where we'd actually look at him as a top 100 player and say he belonged there, but I think he does belong there. For his career, he's been very good against lefties, as you'd expect. 204, 317, 277 line. He's faced 456 lefties, 5 homers allowed. That's it. So real good. I mean, the setup is still strong for Framber Valdez. Last pitcher of the episode, Triston McKenzie, a guy that you seem to like a bit less than many people in the draft room. And I could sort of sense this one coming, even going back to last year. I think in the first half, you expressed some concerns about McKenzie. He did pitch really well for a long stretch during the second half of the year. I think it's a big part of why he's holding this early ADP. So what are your concerns as you look at Triston McKenzie? Is it durability because of the very slight frame that he has, or is there something else still there in terms of command or the arsenal that gives you some pause?
I do remember the storyline that he had a certain fastball and then he went to the minor leagues and he came back and the fastball was harder, but he had less command on it. And he wasn't pitching as well before he went down. I believe this is all in 2021, this story for Triston McKenzie. And he pitched a little better when he came back up, but that still makes me nervous about his fastball. That being said, I do think his curveball is on the same level as Framber's. So he does have that one real weapon that you're looking for. Maybe it's not quite as good as Framber's, but it's a real weapon. The four-seam fastball seems to be doing fine. The slider is below average pitch. So he's kind of a two-pitch pitcher for me, who's had some story in the past, and then also a 92 mile an hour fastball is decidedly below average these days. I mean, that's what he put up for the season last year is 92.5, 92.7. That's below average these days. So below average velocity, some durability concerns, some arsenal concerns, and that his slider rates as a below average pitch. It's just enough to push him down a tick. I'm looking now. I do have guys that are projected to be less than him ahead of him. I think I think the listeners deserve to hear who those are a little bit real quickly. Logan Webb, who with the new update in the model just really popped and had better numbers in location stuff and pitching plus. And I just see him as a baby Framber Valdez, really in a great park. Hunter Green, who, is Spencer Strider Redux, I think, is just another guy who has just unbelievable stuff on 2 pitches. And I think he's going to blow through the league. Dustin May, who similar, just great stuff, way better stuff than results in his small stint last year. Now he's fully healthy, got another year. Logan Gilbert and Nick Lodolo. I suppose I could move McKenzie ahead of Gilbert, and Lodolo has bigger health concerns than McKenzie. So maybe that change is happening on air, but otherwise I feel pretty good about where I have him. He's a top 40 pitcher, has some concerns. The guys who are top 30 pitchers, I think of as much more locks for a lot of innings and quality innings.
Yeah, I think those are all valid concerns with McKenzie. One thing that surprises me is that he fared better the 3rd time through the order than I would have expected with that arsenal. The home runs were a problem for him kind of consistently. That was his skills downside. But if you told me McKenzie's going to slide 2 rounds off his ADP, I have no problem drafting him there. I think it's more about liking other players, non-starting pitchers that go in this range. Sometimes where McKenzie's going, around pick 85, pick 90 by ADP, that's where the last closers I trust are going. And if I don't have a closer yet, because I did some other stuff earlier, that's where I'm just swooping in and addressing my need for some saves. Or if I'm light on speed, there's a nice cluster of players that should still be everyday guys that are pretty easily 25, 30 steals candidates. I might be chasing steals in that spot. So it's usually just a function of how my roster's coming together that pushes me away from McKenzie more than where he's going itself.
That's a good point. I'm not that big of a believer in Ryan Presley. And if you, like me, are a little bit worried about the knees and the velo and the age, and you put him in the 2nd tier, that means the 1st tier is pretty small this year for relievers. And you may want to get Jordan Romano as one of the last starting pitchers in the 1st tier, last relief closers in the 1st tier. And if you want Jordan Romano, he's going to go right around where McKenzie goes, right?
Yeah, and Romano might even go a little earlier than that, but that's the type of decision that you might have to make. Romano, pick 55, so about 2 rounds earlier. It's more like Helsley, Jansen, even Raisel Iglesias is usually gone by then, but you're kind of looking at the Helsley and Jansen could be your true last chance. These guys have a really
and if you want to stay out of last chance, you took Romano earlier. That could mean you take McKenzie when other people are taking their first closer.
Could be. But I think if
that's one thing I found that when I auto drafted Diaz in the 2nd, the one thing that was fun was that when other people were panicking about closers, I was just like, I'm free.
You were gobbling up value everywhere else. Yeah,
I'm totally free of that concern for a while.
Yep. No, I understand that does make you a bit more comfortable in that range. That's going to do it for the first episode of Pitch Your Week. 3 more to come this week, so be sure to...
Wow, we got through the top 30, basically.
I knew it was going to take a full episode. It actually took 1.5 by time because, we're that's what we do. We talk a little too much. Rates and Barrels at theathletic.com. If you got a question for a future episode, hit the like button if you're watching us on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're enjoying the podcast, take a moment to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We really appreciate if you do that. If you don't have a subscription to The Athletic, $2 a month for the first year gets you in the door at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.